we've talked a lot about the older generation and the younger generation. And Gerald is a funny character because he's almost slap bang in the middle. Because Gerald is a very wealthy man. He was born into wealth, like Mrs. Berlin, because his mother and father are Lord and Lady Croft. That means that they own land. That means he would have been born into not only wealth, but generational wealth. So like he'll have land to pass on to his children, etc. But Gerald is a younger character, probably in his late 20s, maybe he's turning 30. And because of that, he does fit the younger generation, but he has this experience of pure wealth, and he is a man in a patriarchal society. And so whether he will change or not is really a maybe. And he doesn't change by the end of the play. And we have to think about all the privileges that Gerald has, that perhaps he is so sheltered and ignorant and blinkered by that he doesn't realise that he should change. And I, as an audience member, am really disappointed in Gerald's lack of change because he has so much power, what he could do with it. And I think that that's what Priestley wants. He wants the audience to be frankly disgusted and disappointed in Gerald's character because he could have been so much more. And Sheila, she sees this, and it's really interesting that this is another side of Sheila's change. She understands we must not build a wall. She's beginning to see the structures that entrap and imprison the vulnerable proletariat. She's going to see their vulnerability. She is humanizing the proletariat, and she is also recognizing the abuse and the callous misanthropy of the people she surrounds herself by. And it is interesting that she begins to subvert patriarchal expectations themselves. She begins to find her own power and know what she can and can't do. So Gerald talks about what he did for Eva Smith, Daisy Renton as he knew her, and he describes it as wanting to help her, and her needing him, and him not feeling for her as she felt for him, but him being someone who was able to give her something for a short time. And Sheila describes him as a fairy prince, which is really cutting criticism if you really think about it. So a prince is a hero. Where's my fairy prince picture for you? Let's imagine this for me. A prince is a hero in stories, often the saviour of the damsel in distress in like typical kind of fairy tales. And by him describing himself as this kind of hero, this kind of saviour, and also think about a prince is wealthy, born into wealth. It's really quite typical of Gerald to see himself this way. She calls him out for his hubris. She's criticising his hubris, him seeing himself as the great big hero in this situation, when in reality, he left her in a worse state than she started in because he abandoned her. And by calling him out on his hubris, she is not being obedient to the man above her in terms of societal expectations and in terms of the fact that he's technically the man who she was engaged to and maybe is kind of still engaged to. She calls him out on his hubris, and by doing that, she subverts expectations of obedience. Patriarchal society says that women should obey men, and she subverts it here. And that is again a change in Sheila, a power that she is given in this play. And she's criticising his superiority here, but she's also, by calling him a fairy prince, she could have just said prince. Priestley could have just written, oh, you were the prince of this situation, or the Prince Charming of this situation. But she says fairy prince. Scathing criticism. A fairy is a magical and fictional creature, okay? It's magic, it's made up in stories, and therefore she recognises the fantasy of this story, the fact that what she is being told is not real, and recognises that it was fictional, that it was only a facade of benevolence. He was only playing the benevolent and philanthropic man because actually his behaviour was callous. He abandoned her at the end. which is not really the end of a story that a prince would be in. He played at being the fairy prince, but actually has been someone very callous and cruel. And Sheila's recognition of this is really crucial because it shows that the younger generation are being taught to view the world differently and are being taught to subvert expectations, and perhaps this change could signal further change for the younger generation. And it also, I guess, tells us that we should criticise callous behaviour, that people who are wealthy are not able to pretend to be heroic and saviours when in fact they've caused a lot of harm.